a way of life regulation. The comment period is closing on Wednesday. So we wanted this time to be mainly kind of a technical Q&A regarding regarding the changes to the text. So to be sure we have time for that, I will ask that sort of more general comments or discussions be postponed sort of until the end of this, until we get through the various specific technical, legal, or language or policy choice related matters. And certainly I expect we will have a number of those. The team's been working very hard on the revised draft, and certainly we acknowledge that putting out, a lengthy document of legal text, regulatory text in track changes can sometimes make it a little hard to understand the purpose or intent or understanding, we had around certain words that we're adding or deleting or changing. You'll see looking at the tracked changes, it's a mix of little changes and more substantial edits. And yeah, so this is a time for us to try to be sure we're all on the same page around what we were trying to achieve. And also, this may bring our attention to areas where we maybe could be more clear, or maybe where the impact of some words we have are not actually what we intended. So we will be taking all kinds of questions, again, really trying to focus on the changes made in this latest draft. And there are 75 of us here on the Zoom call. That's including the water board team. And I do believe a number of board members expressed a lot of interest in this, and they are possibly watching this also through the YouTube link. So yeah, I'll hand it back to the team.
So I think what we're planning on doing today is moving through the same slide deck that we shared in the workshop last Wednesday. And so we wanted to move, I think, starting on slide 9, please follow the different major sort of changes that we were seeing, to direct folks to the sort of reg text, and just sort of methodically go through. And if people have questions in these areas, be sure to answer. So unless we see someone's hand go up, what we'll do is move on. So we'll move through these slides, like I said, just as we did on the workshop last Tuesday. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Corey.
Okay, so I'll go over the 2 changes that we went over for section 966. 966A has where it describes the compliance assessed with the objective. It now has added text that compliance will start in 2027 and go on after that. And then next slide. Last subsections of 966, I believe it's subsections I and J, talk about the 2 paths for alternative compliance. 966I talks about how suppliers might be eligible for alternative compliance if their median household income is less than the statewide median household income. Their 2024 through 2026 water use is on average showing that they'd have to have a reduction of 20% or more in order to meet their 2040 objectives. And if that's the case, they qualify for Path 1, which means they'd be deemed in compliance with the objective, so long as they are reducing per capita water use by 1% or more per year and they are also creating and implementing a plan that's going to show how they are planning to achieve their long-term objective, either by 2041 or a later date if approved by the board. And then 966 subsection J talks about the second path for alternative compliance. This is for suppliers with any median household income who are seeing that their average 2024 through 2026 water use would require a percent reduction of 30% or more in order to meet their 2040 objective. If that's the case, they qualify for this pathway in which they are deemed in compliance with their objective, so long as they are reducing water use by 2% or more per year. Verify adherence, the G480 standard, and same as before, they are creating and implementing a plan that shows how they would achieve their water use objective by 2041 or a later date after that. And then I believe it also calls out 3 specific things that they should include in their plan for achieving the objective. And I believe those are the 2 slides for 966 at the beginning. So do we have questions on these sections? And we do have a hand
It
raised.
looks like we've got a hand up from Spencer Waterman.
Hi. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted a clarification on the condition where if it's over 30%, then you need to reduce GPCD by 2% per year. So just to make sure, that would start in 2027 and go through 2040. So would that be a requirement of 26% reduction? Somewhere in that ballpark? If I'm doing quick math right.
I believe so.
Okay.
Yes, unless someone else on the team tells me that I'm also doing the math wrong.
Okay, thank you.
It's too early for that kind of math, but I think you're right, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, the next hand up is Sierra Orr.
Hi, thank you. Has the state defined what documentation needs to be submitted to verify median household income for the service area?
We have not, no, and we don't specifically call it out in the regulation text either.
Sierra, do you have any questions to add?
I guess maybe do you plan to? Sorry, I remuted myself and it wouldn't let me unmute. Is there a plan to add any of that, or is it just up to the supplier, I guess?
I think at the moment, there might be associated guidance that comes out at the moment. I don't know if anyone else on the team has anything else to add, but
Okay,
no,
that's all.
beyond saying guidance, I think if
You can move on. I just
yourself
wanted to
have
ask.
yeah, but no, for example, for our internal, at least preliminary analysis, we've been using US Census data and an analysis that was conducted by other people on the State Water Board. But no, not at the moment, other than guidance.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so that may have been the, I'll pause here for another moment or two to see if others have questions on this particular section. Spencer again, yes.
Hi, yes. I did have a question about the adherence to G480 standards. I'd heard in a previous workshop from a commenter that this is pretty hard to meet that goal. And so I'm curious, in your meetings prior to this latest revised draft, if you've talked with suppliers about that standard and whether they think it's realistic or not.
I guess Charlotte has come on camera, so I don't know if you'll have more, but I'll just say it was briefly covered in the outdoor work group sessions we had in December. And I think there was still some concern about it, but also I think questions about what exactly is required for the adherence, and then I'll pass it on to Charlotte.
I'm hoping my sound is a little bit better now. No.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, great.
Okay, great.
I think you need to mute one of your
I
devices.
Okay. Well, why don't you go ahead? Rena, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, having technical difficulties.
You're good now.
Is this sufficient? Can you hear me? Okay, great. I'm so sorry about that, everybody. We have received feedback from folks on this. I mean, I think it is in many ways reflecting what have been best management practices for, over a decade now. So while they are, I think in some ways might be challenging for folks to meet, they're also, tried, tested, and sort of have been achieved, right? We've got a number of agencies that are already meeting off the state and are being recognized by Alliance for Water Efficiency, having met the G480 to varying degrees, right? And we can see them on the AWE leaderboard, for example. So I think it might be worthwhile, talking to them and hearing about their experiences specifically. It's not that it's no work, but that it's worthwhile work and work that will definitely help agencies be better stewards of the water resources that you manage. And again, it's something that we're hoping to provide, flexibility to you all as a alternative mechanism to, use water efficiently if the sort of percent reductions that are suggested by the objective are inachievable for you all. So hope that answers the question, and sorry again for the sound troubles.
Okay, thank you. And I can go back, I think, a little bit to the median household income question. So in this section of the proposed reg text, we're saying that it's based on that the median household income should be based on recent data from the Census Bureau or an alternative source that the supplier has demonstrated to be of equivalent or superior in quality or accuracy. So yes, it is up to the supplier to go from existing data sets on income to something that captures income in their jurisdictional area. There may be multiple ways of doing that, but and we may be able to provide some guidance there, but we're not stipulating a particular method or process here. Okay, got a hand up from Lisa Cuellar.
Hi, thank you. So this is regarding the 2% per year reduction for option number 2 of the alternatives compliance pathway. Is that 2% gauged on the 2020 2026 water usage as a baseline, or is that a cumulative, or is it the 2% based on the previous calendar year's water usage? If that makes sense. Because if it's based on the previous year's water usage, you might end up
No, we
saving
were,
more than 2%.
yeah, we were not
Or-
intending it to sort of be cumulative in that sense. So it's a fixed increment per year, not a running 2% of the prior year.
Yeah, we're using the 2024 through 2026 as the static baseline to base your ongoing reductions from.
Okay, Swaranjit Boyal has a hand up.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I just had a couple of questions. For example, we're working on a project. Say if like one of the years you reduce it by 15% because you're working on a project where you're replacing, say, older say just infrastructure that's more reliable and efficient. And like, for example, you're doing an IMI project which can help reduce, tracking, which will reduce usage. Say 1 year you do 10%. Is it like an average over the 3-year period? And my other thing is there like grants that you guys can send a list out that will help? Because I know some are like, for example, if you change grass to turf, programs like that. Is there other ways, for example, say if some are having issues as well trying to meet these demands? Or is there programs? Does California Water Boards or DW have programs for these communities? For example, say if they're a disadvantage where they can help support. For example, like I know here what we're doing is we're getting like 500 like efficient home uses for our most expensive customers that have either leaks or high water bills. That's something we're trying to do, which we got through a grant. It was just something like that. And my one other question was, sorry if I'm just rambling, but I just want to make sure I was trying to get everything is, for example, what do you do in an area where you're growing? For example, we've had, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, that we have a huge amount of growth. How do you calculate that when you're adding potentially up to 300 EDUs a year for like a 5-6 period and you're still continuing to grow, trying to meet that reduced percentage? Thank you.
Okay. So first question about the year-to-year variability. Your reduction might be pretty good 1 year, maybe not so great the next year. To try to address that, we do have a 3-year rolling average. So the 1% per year based on your current year and your previous 2 years. In terms of, I guess I'll have Charlotte answer the funding question and then going off the third question based on population growth. The 1% per year is per capita. So hopefully that addresses some of the concerns about population might be growing, but looking at what is the per capita efficiency trends in your service area. And then Charlotte, anything you want to add on those two or the funding question?
Sure. I just wanted to highlight that on our website, if you guys go to the rulemaking website and then to the sort of public meetings, one of the resources that we made available after our October 4th workshop last year was an Excel spreadsheet that was listing just a compilation of different sources of funding that urban retail water suppliers might be able to tap into, should be able to tap into to advance the kind of work that we all agree needs to be done to make conservation a way of life. And so we have identified those. Hopefully it's of use. We hope to post rulemaking, have more time to coordinate with others to expand and refine that list, but it's something that we want to make sure that you all have in your hands, water suppliers have in their hands to work with, other organizations for landscape transformation, for, infrastructure projects, for rate studies and analyses, for lots of different types of tools that you all have in your toolbox. And so that sort of work in progress is again on our website under the October 4th workshop. It's a Excel spreadsheet that you can download.
Next, it looks like we have Martha Davis.
Yes, I just wanted to make sure I understood the answer to the question concerning growth. Because my understanding is every year, a water agency adds population or adds development that is taken into account and is part of the budget itself. So you add population, you get a higher budget because on the indoor side, clearly you're going to see an allocation for that growth. Did I understand that correctly?
Well,
That
maybe
is
I
also true.
misunderstood the question. I was talking specifically about alternative compliance, how suppliers have to reduce water use by 1% per year. That's us looking at 1% per capita per year. But yes, when we're looking at the objective, it is based on the indoor budget is based on population. So if your population is growing, your indoor budget would also adjust for that. For the outdoor side, if you're building new housing developments, your outdoor budget can grow to accommodate for that as well. So yes, budget would change based on population.
And so Karina is specifically referencing on page 6, section I4, we describe how these percent reductions would be applied to per capita use. So in I4, and then on page 7 of the revised draft text, J4. Shall we turn to Luke?
Yes, thank you. Maybe a dumb question here, but on the percent reduction, what happens if you're not quite at say 30% or 20% threshold? Can you tell a little bit more if utilities or suppliers have an option for alternative compliance?
I think we had trouble understanding, at least I did. Luke, if you could maybe speak a little bit closer to the mic.
Part of the question. Oh, go ahead, Luke.
Sorry, I'll just.
Oh, that's much better.
If you're not quite at the 20 or 30% threshold, are there any alternate compliance thresholds? Or alternate?
There are not. But there are many different ways in which the proposed regulation provides flexibility for suppliers. So while there might not be specifically an alternative pathway, Luke, I think I'm remembering correctly that you're with East Bay Mud. So you guys might want to, take a look at, whether or not there, are variances that you guys might want to apply for and consider. There's also the sort of process for incorporating special landscape areas for the tremendous amount of parks that exist within your service area. There is the bonus incentive for recycled water use. those are and then of course the provisions, things for, planting new climate ready trees and new landscapes. So while there might not be alternative compliance pathways for agencies that don't meet that, 20% threshold for path 1 or the 30% threshold for path 2, right? There are a lot of other mechanisms for agencies to take into consideration, the unique circumstances of your service area. Shall we move on? If there are any more questions on alternative compliance, why don't we give it like a couple more seconds here? And if not, why don't we move to the next slide? I suppose the one after this, please.
Well, we can go on to the next one. There we go. Okay. So next, I'll go over some of the changes that were made to 968 and 969, the two outdoor sections. First off, beginning of the sections 968A and 969A is where the different outdoor standards and when they change are covered. So current draft of the regulation has a standard of a landscape efficiency factor of 0.8 for both the residential and the commercial, industrial, and institutional landscapes with dedicated irrigation meters at 0.8 from the time of adoption until 2035, with an asterisk that for CI&I landscapes with DIMS, the standard doesn't take into effect until, is it 2027 or 2028? Because suppliers still don't have CI&I landscape area, so time is being given for them to get that data from DWR and measure out what exactly is on a DIM. It's
2028, Karina.
Okay, 2028. And so then after that, a standard of 0.63 for both budgets from 2035 through 2040. And then starting in 2040, residential standard is 0.55. CI&I landscapes DIM standard is 0.45. And going on to the next slide. And there we go. Relevant only to the residential outdoor budget in 968B, we talk about the inclusion of 20% irrigable non-irrigated area. Second draft of the regulation says that for suppliers who are not meeting their objective, they may include 20% of their irrigable non-irrigated area until residential landscape area is updated. Next slide.
Why don't we pause here?
Okay.
Yeah, there we go. I figured there'd be a number of questions here. Okay. Let's go to Paul and then afterwards, Justin.
Good morning, everybody. Firstly, thank you for hosting the Q&A. This will be very helpful and appreciate the opportunity to get some clarification of intent. As you know, regulation sometimes is difficult to wade through, and just understanding the intent can help disarm any concerns sometimes. So in regard to the mention that the 20% I&I can be used until the landscapes are remeasured, or I forget the exact phrase you used. I'm in the section of the text now of the regulation trying to find that. But if you could maybe just to clarify your intent for the duration of time which the use of the INI is available to retailers. So for example, if DWR were to, let's say, 5 or 10 years down the line, remeasure residential landscapes and provided an updated understanding of irrigated landscapes, could they still use a portion of the irrigated, not irrigable at a later date if it still exists and they aren't meeting their objective? Or does that literally go away as an option at some point in the future as landscapes get remeasured? I guess that's the confusion.
As written, it would go away. The intention here is to make sure that agencies have accurate, up-to-date data. We discussed a little in the Wednesday workshop last week that the inclusion of irrigable, not irrigated area was meant to, as far as I understand it, address the fact that after the last drought, there were a lot of lawns that folks let brown. And there is a very explicit concern that that area wouldn't have been accounted for, when estimating irrigable, irrigated area. And I think the desire of all of us, like working in this space, is that we have much more contemporary, frequent, and accurate analyses that all of us depend on, right, to get a sense of like, well, what is happening in these service areas. And so certainly that is the goal that we're trying to move forward here, is to create different paths to try to ensure that suppliers are getting that up-to-date data. So we're not relying on landscape area imagery from 2018, for example. So there's that. And then second, that please do keep in mind that the irrigable irrigated area does include a fair amount of land use types, right, that aren't actively being irrigated. So there is within that that land cover, right, already some of that irrigable, not irrigated space too. So while the 20% INI might be something that would, under the proposed reg, sunset after more contemporary data is provided, there is, under existing definitions, a lot of, a decent amount of non-irrigated spaces, even in that irrigable irrigated too. So just some context.
Thank you for that. And as I read the regulation, I got the sense that these updates would apply whether new information would be provided from DWR or whether work was undertaken by a retail agency and work with a consultant to update that data. That would also provide the same trigger that that data was updated, let's say, by a retailer in collaboration with a consultant, and then that INI would no longer be on the table as an option. Is that how you intend that as well? Okay, and it's irregardless of timing, meaning if that work was completed in the next year, the 20% INI would come off the table right away. Or if retailers waited until the next iteration of data was available through DWR, which I can't say what the time frame for that might be, but let's just, for the sake of example, say it's 5 or 10 years from now, that INI option would still be available for the duration of time until DWR provided updated data. Is that kind of the intent?
And that a supplier could use its own data at any point, right? Provided that you demonstrate to the department it's of equal or greater accuracy than what the department has provided you. So that mechanism, that path, that flexibility exists for you regardless of what's happening with the department or another entity that's generating statewide analysis, for this, for this effort.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there. I'm just going to assume it's my turn. So I had a question for Charlotte and Karina. It has to do kind of with the same track on the 20% for I&I. So I think Paul's question kind of answered it. So if and when there's a new data set available from the department, and is the assumption that that new data set would no longer contain any I&I, it would just be either irrigated or not irrigated? I'm just wondering, A, if that's the assumption, the new data set will not have I&I. And the second follow-up question is has the water board staff checked in with any of the consultants? Because we're certainly not going to do a flyover, right? But consultants that have experience doing this, do they feel confident that a newer data set would be in greater quality, that there would not be any I&I category?
I think the answer to the first question, Justin, is that the way that the department categorized these different land classes wasn't, just irrigable or irrigated or not irrigated, right? It was irrigable, irrigated, irrigable, not irrigated, and then not irrigated. And so even within that irrigable, irrigated class, there are, I think Karina is at up to 40%, like brown turf, for example, would still be considered irrigable, irrigated. So there already is within that that analysis, like a decent amount of these, non-irrigated areas that are part of the irrigable, irrigated, right? So just, I guess something to keep in mind as we use, language is important, and sort of context is important. But when thinking about these analyses that were done by the department and will be done in the future, there's a lot of flexibility that was built into the analysis, understanding sort of the way that landscapes shift over time. So even irrigable, irrigated includes not irrigated areas. So please remember that. And then your second question, I think, has to do with the sort of changes over time. I know that that's something that the department is very interested in pursuing and understands will be a challenging effort to undergo, but something that certainly does exist. And Justin, you probably know from the experiences of Moulton, Nagel, and others, right, that there are changes that occur over time. But at least what I've been told anecdotally is that those changes are not really that significant at the service area scale. So I guess we'll see what happens with the data change and with these forthcoming analyses. But this is an iterative process, and we are sort of learning as we grow. And there will be a lot of, I think, rigor and time that's spent ensuring that the data that's produced and used and provided, to suppliers will be of high quality. I think everyone is devoted to that outcome and wanting to make sure that that is what transpires.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I'll say, my experience with the II category is that it will include some areas that appear brown. Like the best example would be a school's play yard area, and let's just be honest, they have poor distribution uniformity, and so there's some brown patches in the turf grass area, look like crop circles now, and so my understanding is that for the purpose of categorizing, they categorize the entire turf area as irrigated II, because to try to nickel and dime a small brown patch wouldn't really make sense, because the intent is that the entire area is irrigated, but the photo interpretation looks like it's not irrigated because it's brown. So that was my understanding, which is like, which kind of matches what you're saying that II does include some areas that are at first glance not irrigated. But I think it kind of goes back to the intent. The intent's to capture the entire planted area with the assumption that the intent is the whole area is getting irrigated. So that makes sense. But I'll say, yeah, because we've worked with NV5, the state's contractor, to do like looking at past years of aerial imagery, and the interpretation that we got was that confidence increases in all of the categories, but we don't necessarily get to a point of 100% confidence to exclude all I&I areas. So I know you weren't necessarily looking for input, but I'll just suggest we hopefully don't close the door on I&I. I think our intent, everyone's goal would be to reduce that number, right? And to get to the either it's irrigated or it's not. But the reality is that you're looking at a photo, and without boots on the ground, flowing of a site, irrigation on a site, you really wouldn't know if it really is irrigated or not. So it seems like I think we're on the same page of the goal is to have better data over the years, but I guess I would worry about data confidence and being able to totally remove something from an equation without knowing what future data availability and data confidence is going to be. Then I had one question / comment on the section earlier. Hopefully it's an easy one, but it's regarding the it's on page 15 of the revised text. So it's paragraph 2A, I guess it is, and it's about the residential parkway areas. And I just wonder if I think the intent here is because those initially weren't captured as part of the parcel, right? And so with the revised data, it's going to include that non-parcel area. So I just wonder if you would mind just a text suggestion of, instead of calling out the word parkway, of just saying non-parcel area. There are going to be some communities where the non-parcel area is actually not part of the parkway. It's actually still part of the front yard. So just to be, I think, more general and not constrict that inclusion of only parkway, if that makes sense.
Thanks. Yeah, I get what you're saying. And good flag. We'll circle back with the DWR folks on this. Thanks.
Apologies, I think I was getting mixed up with CII versus residential, but my initial question, it may still apply, is when the landscape area measurements were issued last time, not all suppliers received them at the same time. So there was discrepancies of many, many months between when people received their data. And so considering this is up until that data is updated, is that on a case-by-case basis based on when the supplier receives their data? Or is it like, well, they released it this year, so everybody is subject to it that year?
So I think if I'm understanding your concern is that if the department re-updates landscape area, it might be that they're doing like 2030 through 2035 and
No, it's so when the last set of landscape area measurements were issued, so like some agencies received it in March, they got their new data. Other agencies received it in July. Other agencies didn't get it until November and December. So I'm just wondering, when we say like this is included until that data is updated, well, one agency got their updated data in March, maybe somebody else got their updated data in December. So is it kind of like based on when your supplier received their data?
So we're considering this entire analysis as one. So does that make sense? So it's
But
after
I think Sierra's
adoption,
asking if she doesn't, if an agency didn't get its, if one agency got its data in March and another got it in October, we wouldn't hold the agency that got it in October to a March deadline.
Right, exactly.
Right, but you're
Yeah.
the intention here, Sierra, is to again just provide that flexibility for you all. And I personally don't think it makes any kind of sense to ask an agency to use data that they don't have yet. So I don't, there might be a nuance in your question that I'm not getting. Maybe Karina understands it that I don't, but I can't foresee the situation that you're describing unfolding, right? I mean, we've been and will continue to be, I think, working very closely with the department and how this data is used and applied and carried out. So good clarifying question, but yeah, I can't see a situation in which that would become a problem for an agency.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on, oh, yep, there we go. Tara. No, you lowered your hand. Okay, let's give it again a couple more seconds here. If there are any more questions on the outdoor standards or I&I, the changes. And if not, let's move to slide 16, please. I think maybe Spencer had a question.
Yeah, thank you. Just looking for a clarification on the note of data availability. In this last annual water use report, suppliers got evapotranspiration, effective precipitation data really late in the game in December, and then had to turn around and submit those reports. And so I'm just wondering if there's any provision that the state will provide that sort of regular annual data by a certain date so that suppliers can incorporate it, potentially, review it and adjust it if needed, with enough time to submit the annual water use report by January. Is there any consideration to setting like a deadline for the state data availability? And then if it, like, for example, if it comes out in December again, is there a chance that, the deadline for a supplier could then be extended because they got the data fairly late? Does that make sense?
Walk the talk is what you're saying. Yes, yeah, I think, we're coordinating with the department, on the, provisions of that data. I think there's still some additional coordination that needs to happen on when certain data be made available, especially for those agencies that will be relying on what is provided by the state rather than using their own data sets. But I don't have that those dates and that sequencing at the front of my mind right now. So that's something maybe we can follow up with you on, Spencer, or add it to a to be generated, FAQ. But I believe the goal, and perhaps Karina, you remember, would be to have everything available by October.
Yeah, I don't think DWR is on call, so not to speak for them, but last I remember, it does take 2 to 3 months for them to process the precipitation and ETO data. So I think moving forward, once things are a little more organized, the goal would be to have it around October.
Very good question and absolutely legitimate concern. So thanks for raising it, Spencer. Moving on to slide 16.
Let's do it. Okay, so next up we have residential pools. They are now part of the definition for a residential special landscape area, which means that they can get a landscape efficiency factor of 1.0, and this is independent of what year or what the residential standard is at the moment. Next slide.
I think we're going all the way to slide 19 now. Yep.
Okay. So yeah, so then several other changes were made to the outdoor budget. If you guys have any questions on that, let me know. Otherwise, we can go on to variances. Like Justin, is the question outdoor or variance related?
And that's
Outdoor regarding the pools and SLA.
Okay.
Okay, what's up?
Just a question on that. First, thanks. I mean, this makes a lot of sense technically, so awesome. I just had a question about Imwello and if the water board with this change is planning on, since it's including it in calculating the objective, if that's going to be any coordination with DWR and updating Imwello to, because it's sort of been a gray area on residential pools if they were or were not intended to be included in special landscape areas. So I'm just wondering if there's going to be any like, hey, can you go ahead and update Imwello to include it since we're including it in the objective? Would be sort of a question, and if you can't answer it, it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding from Imwello is that it's more closely aligned with the DWR recommendation. Residential pools are just part of your residential landscape. But no, I mean, I'm sure we'll be listening in to whenever Imwello gets updated, but at the moment it's their own DWR rulemaking process. So we'll see if any updates get made from that end. Do we have more pool or SLA questions? Jasmine?
Yes, good morning. I am curious about the residential agricultural section. So I don't know if this is jumping the gun a little bit, but I understand from the presentation that it isn't related to our actual agricultural use as we report that in the EAR, but it's based on data that we haven't seen as suppliers yet. What I am curious about is it's not clear to me if this is automatically included in our budgets. The section that it's in, 968, shows that it may be added, but then it was automatically included in our new batch of provisional data. So just wanted some clarification about that.
Sure. So residential agriculture, we have it in two subdivisions in 968. It's a special landscape area that can get a LEF of 1.0 and may be added in the objective, and that you would have to self-report, self-input the associated data associated with it. That has all been provided by DWR, so hopefully that's a pretty easy process. However, you can also go with the variance route, which does require a little more of the application justification process. But again, a lot of that information has already been provided by the department. So yeah, does that help? Any other questions?
So it is automatically included if you want it to be, unless you choose to do it as a variance?
Pretty much, yes. I don't think we have any additional sort of application requirements for it to be included as an SLA.
Okay.
So yeah, if you report the associated information because you want it as an SLA, you can do so.
Great, thank you.
So I had a question about the variance related to livestock. I know it wasn't changed, but I'm just wondering what kind of data are you looking for to kind of substantiate our counts of different livestock and that kind of thing? Is customer reported data sufficient, or are you looking for something else?
Well, in the actual rec text, we keep it pretty open. I think this is something that will probably be addressed by guidance. And then along the same lines, the DWR did have their report on the other budget, and part of that they do have recommended methodologies for how to report, how to do the actual surveying, estimating, and also how to report it. But no one clear direction or requirement at the moment that I am aware of, unless, again, the team. Feel free to interrupt me. But yeah, I hope that helps.
If you look at, I think it's the sort of bottom of page 18 to the top of page 19, it does outline the general requirements for receiving a variance or a temporary provision. So that's sort of generically applied across, all variances. And then the specifics, as Karina was mentioning, there would be subsequent guidance informed by the department's recommendations.
Okay.
And then
Thank
I
you.
believe page 24, if you're looking at track changes,
Okay.
it's 968J.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Back to Spencer.
Yeah, thank you. I know we're kind of jumping around here, but I think this is in the right category. But as far as documenting new landscape area, the regs, default to using MWLO annual reports. But sometimes, obviously, some agencies overlap multiple land use agency jurisdictions. And oftentimes those annual reports don't really break out landscape area in the way that's usable. So it looks like the other options are to do on the ground measurements or remote sensing methods. Could you just elaborate a little bit on what would suffice? Like, would a Google image snapshot suffice? Or what do you mean specifically by remote sensing method?
These would be methods that are similarly evaluated, by the department as well. So it would have to be something that meets the sort of quality sort of criteria, the quality, the caliber of the work that has been done by the department when it comes to analyzing the irrigable, irrigated, irrigable, non-irrigated, et cetera. So it would be that rigor of analysis. Shall we move on to slide 20?
Okay. Yeah. So, variances for variances which are covered in 967, 968, and 969. We've updated the threshold of significance for a variance to be 5% of the relevant budget for most variances. So if you are applying for a variance that's related to indoor residential water use, such as seasonal population, then it would have to be 5% of the residential indoor budget. DWR originally recommended a 1% of the objective threshold when using more accurate calculation methods. So for those same variances and those same more accurate calculation methods, we now have that it be 1% of the relevant budget, and then 0% for ponds and lakes, since these are requirements that are set by a separate regulation or sort of like regulatory process. And then maybe I'll quickly go on to the next slide since it's also variance. Oh no, never mind. Maybe that is my only variance slide.
Why don't we address Justin's question?
Hey, thank you. I was trying to understand the variances, and one of them I was trying to get more detail on. The threshold is for irrigation with high TDS recycled water. So for that one, it seems like the threshold is really more of the actual TDS itself, not necessarily a percent of use. Is that correct? That there's not a percent of use threshold, only the actual TDS?
It would be both.
Yeah.
Is how
Okay.
I sort of understood the department's recommendation, and also as we've proposed it.
So as long as the recycled water that's of a high TDS is more than, I guess I'm not sure what the percent is. I was trying to look through the text and I wasn't finding a number. Maybe I'm just not seeing it.
It's one
Is it
of the odd
1%?
ones that it's you can apply it to both CII landscapes with DIMS and the residential outdoor budget. So we're saying like as long as cumulatively that is the 5%. So it is a 968.
Oh, okay.
It's just oddly worded.
I'm seeing on page 21 of the revised text, kind of middle of the page, it says 1% of the sum. So I think that's the only spot that it talks about a percent that I could find.
I believe this is one of the ones where you can go, depending on the calculation method, it can be either 5% of the relevant budget or 1%. So there is a 1% pathway.
Oh, okay.
But if you look at 968, C F1.
Is that little f?
Page 18, F2, like, is it F2?
Okay, yeah, that's
It's the water use, the associated water use must for any individual variance identified in paragraph.
And we can, if you want, we can follow up later. I don't want to hold everyone else up on the call, but I guess I was just trying to that one in particular. I was having a hard time understanding if it was still, based on a percent of either that component of, that one budget, or if it was the overall budget. But yeah, we could just follow up later.
5 or 1, depending on what method you're using to calculate it. But yes, we can also follow up later.
That's okay. Cool. Thanks, Karina.
similar to the seasonal population variance, is that there are sort of a 5% threshold or a 1% threshold. So if you're using a more accurate methodology, then an agency would be able to avail itself of the 1% threshold. And so that same flexibility is, and sort of opportunity, I guess, is provided for the high TDS. Why don't we move to Martha Davis?
Yeah, when you follow up with that, I'd be interested in just also being in that conversation. Water agencies still have to meet their anti-degradation standards that are built into the recycled water plans, right?
Yes. Yeah, for the the high TDS variants, there are a number of criteria that agencies would have to meet in order to avail itself avail themselves of that particular variance, including demonstration that it is not, in conflict with salt and nutrient management plans or the anti-degradation policy, et cetera, and that those additional criteria are stated I will follow up as soon as we find it, unless Karina is able to quickly point out the number. But they are there. Here we go. It's on page 17. Suppliers delivering recycled water with high levels of TDS shall only be eligible for the variance if the following conditions are met. And then there are criteria that are stated.
And page 22 if using track changes.
Thanks for translating. Okay. Why don't we move to Tara?
Hi, thank you. Apologies if this isn't the right section to ask this question, but I do have a recycled water question on just regular recycled water, so not with high TDS and not potable reuse. Just if you could help me understand the incorporation of regular recycled water and if that does, and if consumption of regular recycled water does in fact contribute to determining if we've met the objective or not.
So yeah, recycled water that's being used to irrigate either residential landscapes or CI&I landscapes with dedicated irrigation meters would be part of the objective. And they're also considered, landscapes irrigated with recycled water are considered special landscape areas. So they would have a standard of 1.0, and that's also somewhere in the reg text. Yeah, I think that's the relevant part of it. Hope that helps.
Turn it over to Paul.
Thank you. Since this question just came up, I'm going to jump on it. I was kind of waiting to see if 975 on reporting was going to be later in a slide, but in regard to SLAs and the use of recycled water, I'm on page 37 of the track change copy, where it details that these special landscape areas, suppliers need to document at least once every 5 years a certain number of criteria. But for the volume of recycled water, it says not every 5 years. It says this must be updated annually. So I just want to get clarification there. This is, I have to go back and find the small letter. It looks like B2I. B2DI, there it is. Anyway, just want clarification if it's 5 years or annually on the volume of recycled water applied by source that needs to be reported. And then a second question in this section. under III, where it states the square footage of lands irrigated with recycled water, if annually reported to the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the value reported pursuant to this section shall be the same value as annually reported to the regional board. So in that regard, just clarifying that some of our retailers who've made significant investments in recycled water provide those waters to non-urban users and urban users. And so under their NPDES requirements, they often have to record or report to the regional board their total volume and the irrigated lands, but there is a differentiated between urban and non-urban areas. A significant portion of the distribution of that water is for, pasture land applied as a disposal methodology more than it is for, beneficial potable offset. So I'm curious how or what the intent there is in terms of those volumes having to be the same when the volume reported to the regional board would include significant areas outside of the urban use. And you're just wanting to collect the data, so it doesn't matter, or do you want them to differentiate between the square footage used for urban offset versus other areas outside, like ag customers per se?
Thanks for the question, Paul. I'll answer your first question first, which is that we are specifying that the volume of recycled water applied by source does have to be updated annually. This is, we take the data streamlining directive very seriously, and to the extent that there is existing data that is already being reported to the board, we want to make sure that we're grabbing that relevant information and sort of weaving it into the calculation of the objective. We don't want there to be two sort of very slightly different numbers that are reported for two sort of different purposes. If you're reporting at one place, let's make sure it's the same value that you're reporting into this other place. And so given that agencies are already reporting the volume of recycled water by source that is produced annually through the volumetric annual reports, we want to ensure that that is the same data that we're also using as part of this process for data streamlining and for reporting automation. And similarly,
that number that's reported in total won't be the metric that's used to establish the use of SLAs and calculating their outdoor budgets, though? It would be something different.
The amount of water that you're producing by source is it's sort of there's the actual and then there's the hypothetical, and so it's just the one of the things that statute asks everyone to do is there's what is actually being used, and then there's what's being calculated for the purposes of the objective. Which brings us to the sort of second question that you asked, which is about the square footage of lands irrigated with recycled water. This also is sort of intended to honor the data streamlining directive. If agencies are already producing, this analysis as part of their permit requirements, we'd much rather sort of lean on those existing numbers rather than have you all sort of generate it through some secondary process. But I think you raise a good point about, specifying that those irrigated lands are limited to those that are sort of comprising our part of the objective. So perhaps that's something we need to sort out internally. So I appreciate you flagging that.
Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, good questions. why don't we move on to the bonus incentive?
Sure. So now that State Water Board passed its regulation for direct potable reuse, end of last year, draft regulation has been updated to include a method for calculating the bonus incentive with direct potable reuse. And if there are no questions on that, we can go on to the next slide. And move on to performance measures.
All right. So I guess for folks that are following along, looking at the reg text itself, I'm on page sort of 30 if you're showing all the track changes, and I guess page 24 if they're all incorporated. Just to reiterate, there were a number of changes that were mentioned to section 972, which is the sort of classification systems that will be used by urban retail water supplier. The first big change is that rather than having large landscapes be one of the classifications that is used, it was changed to landscapes with dedicated irrigation meters. So sort of building on the work that is being done, for the calculation of the objectives. Second major change here was that we got rid of the interim milestones that the department had recommended, and just have a single date now in which all of classification should be complete for existing customers, which for the purposes of the revised draft now refers to those customers that are customers at the time of adoption. And so after 2028, a supplier would not be obligated to maintain sort of 100% classification, but rather maintain a 95% classification rate. And then old habits die hard, excuse me. This is not, 972 has also sort of supported this change that we see throughout the CII section, which is that we're no longer sort of having these BMPs apply to customers, but rather to connections. Since we heard from a lot of suppliers that is makes a lot more sense in terms of how you all engage with the water users within your service area, but then also very sensibly how that data has been reported to us through things like the clearinghouse and its predecessor, the EAR. Those were the changes to 972, and barring any questions, happy to move on to the following slide to talk about the changes to 973. Okay, thank you. So for 973, I think the one of the sort of bigger changes was that the definition of what a sort of qualifying landscape is was changed. Rather than the threshold being that landscape is estimated to use more than 500,000 gallons of water per year or more, this threshold is now sort of reverted to a size threshold and is proposed to be 1 acre. And so everything that is described in 973 would apply to sort of qualifying landscapes exceeding that half an acre threshold. The other change to 973 is that it provides suppliers with options for how to proceed with these qualifying landscapes. Sort of option number 1 would be to sort of identify sort of all of them, or option number 2 would be to identify a subset of those that are estimated to exceed the water budget that is calculated pursuant to the formula that's in subsection C1. So depending, the supplier again has options, which path do you want to take? And then some of the other changes that were made to 973, there are some quite sort of simple ones just made to clarify the role of the supplier as opposed to the customer, to also remove these interim milestones that were recommended by the department. Again, just focus on the sort of end goal and sort of pushing back the date until 2040 was another big change. And I think that's all to really highlight here, but happy to answer any questions. I know Justin and others who are on the CI performance measures like work group. I don't know if you have any additional questions here. Okay. Please go ahead.
Hey, I just wanted to ask a question about the classification system. And so we're going with the ESPM categories plus 4.
Mm-hmm.
The plus 4 categories, like specifically the commercial laundry. So like I'm just envisioning like a quarter laundromat place, I guess using the traditional ESPM categories, I think we would have put that under services. They specifically call out like dry cleaning as an example of a place that would fit into that category. So, calling out a laundromat separately, it's fine. Are you envisioning any collaboration with the portfolio manager crew at Energy Star in any modifications or alignment or anything like that from these categories, especially these like specific water intensive categories of either calling out a subcategory in their primary categories, anything like that we could look forward to and trying to like get prepared for any potential changes to ESPM categories?
I personally think that would make a lot of sense given how many suppliers there are in California and how many more. It would certainly enhance the utility of their already really great tools. So let's hope so.
Okay, cool. And then I didn't really have any questions on the commercial MUM thing, but happy to support that. I think the work group got a lot of agreement on a lot of things that are reflected in here.
All right, Michael.
Hey, so I was just wondering what kind of documentation are we going to be expected to produce showing that our AMI is sufficiently identifying, estimating, and analyzing outdoor water use to meet the requirements in 973?
That's not something that we've stipulated here, but something that can be provided in subsequent guidance, and I think is worth a much larger conversation than what we've got here. But we'd certainly welcome sort of feedback and ideas, and would work with suppliers in the department to provide that guidance.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, if there are no more questions on 973, why don't we move to 974? Oh, Spencer, sorry, if you had another question.
Yeah, I was just curious, a little bit more on the background on how it went to half an acre rather than DWR's recommended acre threshold. Sounds like there might have been a working group that gave input on that.
Sure. I mean, with it's in my experience so far that regulations are a lot about striking a balance, right? And so we have some entities who are hoping for, I think, an even sort of smaller threshold, and suppliers who are hoping for a larger one. And in many ways, this sort of 1/2 acre represents a bit of a compromise, I'll say. I will also say that the department's recommendation of 1 acre was, as I understand it, informed by some really good work that was done by CalWEP and others to understand the cost effectiveness of specifically installing dedicated irrigation meters on landscapes with mums. And one of the things that has been, I think, a source of confusion for a lot of the sort of parties that have been following this regulation is that 973 would be requiring the installation of a DIM, but that's not the case, right? It's saying that either you would install a dedicated irrigation meter, you know, working with your customer as a supplier, or employ these different in-lieu technologies. And given that the cost of these in-lieu technologies are often so much lower, right, and accessible to both suppliers, right, and to the customers that they're working with, it seems that while that 1 acre sort of threshold represents a very reasonable and respectable bookend, right, it's not, I think, capturing the full universe of really good work that suppliers could undertake and working with large landscapes to help ensure that that water is being used more efficiently. And so when we sort of looked at our the tool that we were using to understand what threshold might make the most sense, I mean, personally, I still think like a volumetric threshold is the sort of fairest in a lot of ways, because it seemed like there was just a more equitable distribution of impacts throughout the state. There were fewer landscapes that were affected with greater water savings, is what we saw with the tool that we had. But we also heard from suppliers loud and clear that a volumetric threshold was just more slippery because of how things change from year to year, and that initial size threshold made it a lot easier to just sort of like identify those landscapes that they would work with and move forward. So that 1/2 acre also seems to sort of coincide with the similar number of landscapes that would be impacted if we were to use that 500,000 gallons per year threshold. And there was a strong desire on the part of particularly the environmental community that the changes that that we made to the section 973 at least not result in the reg having a significantly smaller effect in terms of driving improvements and how we're managing commercial, institutional, industrial landscapes statewide. So I probably actually said way too much on this, and there's now a lot of other hands up because I'm going on, and there's probably corrections and additional questions as a result. So anyway, I hope that addressed your question, Spencer. But why don't we move to Sierra and then Nate?
Thank you, Charlotte. I think I'm sorry. I'm on page 37 if you're under simple changes. And this is kind of, again, one of those more ethereal questions, but specifically under item, like the bottom part of that page 2, and reporting. So if there's a CII property that has multiple DIMs, but no one DIM serves more than 1/2 an acre, I'm trying to figure out where they fit in, because they don't fit in to the large landscape if that dedicated irrigation meter serves less than 1/2 an acre, right? But then you're still reporting them as the number of connections is, well, no. That's what I feel like DIMs and large landscapes have now gotten tied together. So if it's a DIM, but it's less than half an acre, where does that fall?
DIMs are part of the objective, right? So if you have a commercial, industrial, and institutional landscape with a dedicated irrigation meter, it would be folded into the calculation of your budget for CII landscapes with DIMs.
Right, but we're not reporting, like it says, like for suppliers that have installed a DIM, the number of connections associated with large landscapes that have had a DIM installed, for example. But what if they have a DIM, but now it's not considered a large landscape because it's less than half an acre? Would you be reporting that one?
Just for the 1 year that it was.
So if it's installed,
you're reporting on your progress, then it becomes subject to the objective and you're no longer doing any work with it for 973.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Oh, I might follow up on that one, but okay, thank you.
Okay, well, and if you have suggestions, please share them.
Yeah, I think it's the
right,
tying the
public
half
process.
an acre with the DIM that messes me up, because there are cases where there's a dedicated irrigation meter for less than half an acre, and so then it kind of muddies the waters.
All right, well, maybe we should follow up later, because you may be onto something, but maybe we can sort of dig into it and see if there is an issue there. But yeah, I know how to find you, so we'll talk later. Nate, hand it over to you.
All right, good deal. Hey, thanks. Going back to, let's see, section 973, because it then jumps in and relates to 974. So and words are important, as you've mentioned. You mentioned, and the ledge says employ, and then if you jump into 974, all the various BMPs that one can offer. I make the use of the word offer versus the use of employ. And I want to just find out, and a lot of entities want to know the intent between the word employ, which means thou shalt perhaps, versus, hey, we've got to offer, and it takes two to tango. Just wanted some clarity from your perspectives on that use of word and what's the intent there.
Yeah, this one has been, I think, hard to get the language right, but I think we have. But if we've, please do flag it if we've sort of made a mistake here. We've tried to be very consistent in that BMPs are something that agencies offer. We heard very clearly from all the suppliers, especially on the CII working group call, that you can offer sort of a tool or a service to a customer, but they might not take you up on it, right? And so we have, to the extent that we're describing BMPs, tried to use that word offer consistently, like throughout 974. One of the, I guess, changes that I did not describe or articulate in 973 is that we have tried to limit the in-lieu technologies to actions that agencies can carry out, that they could employ. And so now that list is limited. It is intended to be limited to actions that agencies can take regardless of what a customer does. So that's the intention of the proposed changes. But if we got that wrong, I know you'll call us out on it. So, but okay. that is the intention with those changes.
All right. So thank you. And then just moving over to reporting for on the CII particularly, what's the thought and intent behind estimating annual water savings regarding in-lieu technologies and BMPs? Really looking for the why, the how, because some of the concern is obviously with the minute you get into estimating outdoor savings, that's a very tricky, slippery, very inaccurate, very imprecise kind of open question mark. What's the purpose here?
in my mind, the purpose is to try to give us a sense of what's working well for suppliers and what's not. And to that degree, some of the information that is being provided, to the water board, and that we will in turn share with everybody, right, is that we'll all have a much better understanding of which are the most effective tools in a supplier's toolbox. So this provides, again, in my mind, an opportunity for data sharing and collaboration. As far as I understand it, there isn't any information like this that really exists, and so it could provide a really good opportunity for us understanding the efficacy of different strategies. And that's, again, my opinion, and not necessarily reflecting that of our 5 different board members, but just my own take on it. Do you have any other questions, Nate, or shall we pass it to Justin?
I'll pass it to some others. There are a couple other on reporting, because just flagging that there are a couple that we've seen regarding reporting that even if it's not fully written out in the other previous sections, if one is supposed to report on numbers, then by default it's been included. So there are a couple of issues that we want to flag or ask the question about of, hey, we don't see this in the reg or in the other sections, but yet now we're being asked to report on the water use related to certain things or other aspects that we can bring attention to here in a second.
All right, Justin, back to you.
All right, one more question. It has to do with section 974, with the BMPs that we're doing for our commercial customers.
Why don't we move to that next slide, please?
Okay, or if you want me to just be quiet, I can wait till you get to that one.
No.
Oh, you're already okay.
Fine.
So, for this one, I guess I wanted to double check that the intent is, for whenever we're going to be documenting the BMPs and everything we that we're doing for our commercial customers, this, it's based on where the customers fit, like 97.5 percentile or 80th, and there's some parts that talk about, based on which classification they're in. One of those classifications now being that we're doing the ESPM +4, one of those categories is landscapes with dedicated irrigation meters. So I wanted to just check, is the intent that we would be performing best management practices for irrigation meters? That's just sort of a maybe unintended consequence of keeping that category as part of the ESPM +4.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if
it's sort of like the appendix. Yeah, it's like a something that got left behind. That's a really good flag, Justin.
So do you?
Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't know whatever the answer is, if it makes sense to just pull that category from classification. Like, I guess I also was kind of following up on what was the intent of, like, what's the value of classifying irrigation meters for the purpose of 972.
Yeah, no, those are good questions and good points.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Why don't we move to Paul?
Thank you. I appreciate the additional clarification provided in 974A regarding the list of disposable buildings to be made available by the CEC, and I just wanted to provide a comment in regard to that, which is to understand, I guess, if that's a work product that the CEC is going to be providing at some point soon, or if the reference there is in regarding the lists that are already on the website.
It's a work product that they provide annually. So they provide an annual update to their list.
Okay.
So it's
I have looked at their website for the the annual lists that they provide, but if I'm not mistaken, those lists are reporting out the benchmarking information that disclosable buildings have submitted to the CEC as part of the building benchmarking regulation. And in reviewing those data sets, it's clear that a large number of disclosable buildings are not completing their reporting requirements. And consequently, it's not really a list of disclosable buildings so much as it's a list of disclosable buildings that have actually done their reporting. There is a mention on the CEC website that they're planning to reach out to those disclosable building owners who have not met the regulatory requirement to fulfill their reporting. And I understand from communication with the CEC that they use Touchstone IQ, which is a third-party consultant, to actually provide the CEC with that disclosable buildings list. So I was hopeful in seeing the redone regulation that that Touchstone work product of all the disclosable buildings in the state is going to be posted as a resource for water retailers to access.
Yeah, I mean, the goal here is, again, to just sort of align the work that water and energy utilities are doing. And to that degree, we've identified this list that's specifically being made available by the CEC. And so that list will be updated on an annual basis, may become, much more accurate over time. But the way that the proposed reg has been revised is that the obligation for the supplier would be just to work according to that list of disclosable buildings that has been identified by the CEC. I suppose if we got a lot of comments from Sonoma Water, Paul, that you want to take on additional work to get those, buildings that the CEC missed, we could, consider those comments. But yeah, I mean, right now it's just sort of let's use that list as the foundation, and again, that list is updated on an annual basis.
Yeah, I guess my confusion is just that the list is reported in arrears by a year or a year plus. And so, yeah, that was what was confusing.
Yeah. Thanks for the comments and questions. Why don't we kick it over to Deb?
Hi, yes. Thank you. I just wanted to tag on to what Paul's saying. So if I understand this correctly, what we're being asked is to take this list, and I guess we would be supplying that as part of our reporting. And then it says upon the building owner's or agent's request, then provide them with that information. Is that correct? So what's on us is to identify the disclosable buildings in the service area by that public website, and then it's on the building owner to request anything from us. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, those are the proposed changes.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Let's see. There were a number of other changes to 974, in addition to what we've been talking about with the sort of disclosable buildings threshold. One of the other changes were to, sort of similar to 973, provide suppliers with sort of different pathways. Again, additional flexibility here to sort of choose the path that makes the most sense for suppliers in terms of identifying sort of qualifying customers that you would offer BMPs to, sort of path number one, which would mirror the department's recommendations of just looking at the biggest water users, but top 2.5 biggest water users and the top 20% of water users. And then sort of path number two reflecting more of the sort of initial proposal, initial proposed regulation of looking at the top 2.5 highest and then the top 20, which then each of the CII categories, and then this new sort of path number 3, sort of providing suppliers with the most flexibility of identifying customers that are deemed to be inefficient according to the KABIs, the key business activity indicators that the supplier would develop. So the 3 different pathways are here. There's this off-ramp for suppliers that use little CII water use. We removed the non-functional turf BMP, and that is actually now just focused in the reporting requirements. Tell us what you all are doing there. And then similar to the other CII performance measures, we've removed the interim milestones and extended the sort of compliance obligation, sort of looking out to 2040 before this work has to be done for existing connections. The other change here that we have mentioned is that we've, I guess, specified that using regional programs is, can count towards this work. So I think that's it for the 974, but if there are any more questions on that, happy to answer those. And if not, why don't we move to reporting? To the next slide, please. Okay. I heard a lot of concerns articulated by suppliers at our workshop last Wednesday, so I assume that folks will have a lot to ask about. Section 975, if you are looking at the version of the reg text with the sort of changes showing, starts on page 36. If you're looking at just the changes incorporated, it starts on page 28. So what we've attempted to do here is provide greater clarity on the reporting elements. We have, as were discussed previously with some of the questions that were asked about, what's annual, what's only needs to be provided 5 years, made changes to sort of specify when things need to be reported on an annual basis. And then throughout the reg section here have made changes to sort of reflect changes that have been made in other sections of the draft reg. So since I expect there will be a lot of questions that folks have, I'll stop there with that sort of superficial overview of the reporting section and then open it up to questions. I realize that we only have 7 minutes late, but I did want to say that we don't have a hard stop time at noon. So if we do want to, water board staff can stay on a little bit longer to answer additional questions that folks may have if we don't get to. Or maybe we're all done. Maybe we've answered all your questions, everything you've ever wanted to know. Go ahead, Tara.
Thank you. I was just wondering if you could provide clarification. I do see some of the track changes in here are about the previous state fiscal year. And I was wondering if there's any update on if calendar year will also be considered given the other reporting that this might refer to.
So we have a very sort of strong sort of determination by our council that really what makes sense here is fiscal year. Otherwise, the timing just doesn't work. We don't want to put suppliers in a situation where they have exactly 1 day to turn around a report if calendar year was used. We think that's unreasonable and unfair. That said, I do want to remind folks that we are moving, right? We've moved away from the electronic annual report and to the clearinghouse for looking at a lot of this data that you would be using for reporting. And so, for example, at least with the EAR, which was previously done on calendar year, now there exists a situation in which anyone could easily extract the data from the clearinghouse to, get that data on a fiscal year basis, for example, because you all are providing monthly updates to it. So hopefully that can absolve some of the concerns that folks have about this calendar year, fiscal year situation. Admittedly, there is an inconsistency with water loss, which we'll have to navigate. But between the changes, this move from the EAR to the clearinghouse, and then the unfortunate sort of spot that statute put us in, we do firmly feel that the fiscal year timeframe does make a lot more sense. I'm sorry to not provide a happier response, Tara. Go ahead, Spencer.
Yeah, on that same topic, I know that there are a few proposed bills out there that may propose changing that regulation in terms of the deadline and potentially allowing more flexibility for calendar and fiscal year. So I don't know the timing of those proposed bills. Do you have any sense of if those do go through, how it would be incorporated into these regs? Or would it stay as the fiscal year regardless?
This is David for the board. That's a tough one to answer because bills are not law, they are bills, and what they tell us to do and how isn't set yet. So we're going to take that as it comes, but we're going to do what we can with what we have. So I know that's not an answer, but if the law changes and it gives us an opportunity to change our regulation, we're going to make sure that our regulation meshes with statute. And we certainly hope that statute doesn't change in a way that causes a conflict without giving us a chance to make a change. So we'll have to figure that out.
Got it. Thanks.
Good question. Let's go to Jasmine.
Thank you. I'm the staff member for the city of Santa Barbara that does the Safer Clearinghouse reporting. And just for whatever it's worth, there still is an emphasis on calendar year reporting with that. There's a required, yes, I report monthly, but there's also required at the end of the year. It's due at the end of March that it's focused on still the calendar year. There seems to still be a focus on that as far as easily extracting data. So I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine. Yeah, we can circle with our colleagues in the Division of Drinking Water, but our intention, and our research data specialist, Mariel Rodero, feel free to jump in on this if you'd like, is that that monthly data can be extracted at any time and used. So if you completed your fiscal year reporting, you would have many months, right, to QA/QC it and make sure that it's in good enough shape to be used for the purposes of reporting, for this reg. We're also working on making sure that we can sort of access it and can make it available to you and to all urban retail water suppliers much more easily. So we are exploring ways to help sort of automate reporting to lessen that burden for suppliers. I don't know if Marielle, there's anything else you want to add?
Well, yeah, just we're coordinating with DDW to figure out the best way to access that data on a continuous basis so that, you know, we're not just receiving annual reports, we're receiving data every month. And, you know, the reason that we're trying to use the clearinghouse data in the first place is because there is that ability to go in and make changes at any point rather than, you know, with the EAR where before you weren't really able to make changes after a certain time. So I guess, you know, stay tuned, but you know, we're hoping that it'll make it easier. We shall see.
Okay, well, thank you for the answers.
Right, and Nate, you mentioned you had a number of questions on reporting, so pass it back to you.
I'll keep them pretty brief though, but just going back to the previous question that was just asked, I do think it's, you know, it's a two-way street, and I appreciate everyone at the state level in the different departments. You know, there's greater coordination that's continued to happen when agencies do find little issues with, oh, well, the population's this or that, and how we can continue to be expedite reviews and clarifications on both sides is going to be important. So it's been good, and we're all iterative and learning on that one. So continued dialogue on that front will be good. Couple things on the reporting. So on page 46, at the top, near the top, there's discussion on providing just after we need to produce all the water use in the residential sector, which obviously makes sense because that's part of the objective. In terms of the question is, what's the intent for reporting the top 10% of water use volume at the single family and multifamily level? And the reason I asked the question, it really just falls under the idea of perhaps duplicative, and or what does it start to tease out that starts to have to inform reporting processes on? That's one high level comment that agencies have kind of started to pick up on. And then related to that is process water. So on the top of page 47, you know, by definition in the objective, process water was excluded from the objective. So now we're having to report on its use. So open question mark on that. And then I'll finalize it with another one, just being, again, getting back to the estimated water savings attributable to different best management practices. It's a very worthwhile, ambitious idea, no doubt, but it really, what we're concerned about is it opens us, the retailer, into really hard and imprecise, unknown entities, because CII is so disparate. They're all additive, or excuse me, they're not all additive, right? You employ different BMPs. How do you know which one did what and attribute which intervention to what savings level? It really starts to make this a very indelicate dance of what to report on. So it's not that we don't want to do it. It's just what is this? What level of analysis? And then even after you've done the analysis, what level of confidence do you put on any of that? And with regards to the estimating. So those are my like high level nutshell question marks or intent questions. Thank you.
So first question was about the reporting requirement for looking at the top 10% of water users. This is something that many, including our board, are interested in understanding. There have been a number of reports, recently studies that have come out indicating that often a majority of water is often used by a very small sort of subset of the customer base. I think it was in Las Vegas, I think, where it was like the top 10% of residential customers were using 50% of all the water delivered to residential customers. So to the degree that, you know, we all have a better understanding of these patterns in California, it can help us understand, you know, why or why not different tools are working and helping to incentivize more efficient water use throughout, a supplier service area. So I think this is a nice example of a reporting requirement that can help to sort of shed light on water use patterns in California. And our board has agreed with that sentiment and asked us to not only include that information, but also to specify that it be for sort of distinguishing between single family and multifamily as a way of getting even greater clarity there. That's question number one. Question number two was about the process water and the requirement that a supplier estimate the percentage of industrial deliveries that is processed water. Here also, the intention is to get a sense of, how much water is even sort of being affected by the CII performance measures, because as you mentioned, Nate, the legislation statute specifically exempts processed water. So here, just trying to gauge like how much water are we focused on here. So again, getting a sort of better sense of impact in terms of the reg and efforts, and whether or not they make sense. And then finally, your question around, I guess it's more of a comment really regarding the performance measures, the reporting requirements. I guess I'll turn a question back to you, which is like, to what degree do you think you should qualify these estimates that you're making? I mean, I think that's perhaps we should add a reporting requirement for the degree of confidence that a supplier has in the estimates that are being provided. I'm not sure. Again, it's a good gauge, sort of a meter of the efficacy of these different these efforts and initiatives. But if you have different ideas, again, that's the purpose of the public comment period, is for us to hear them and do something better if there is a better option available to us. So we're open. Don't know, Nate, if you have additional comments that you want to make or questions. Happy to. There we go.
All right. Yeah, we'll respond to that because it is an interesting question you allude to. And the challenge with all CII is that I think it does make sense. Let's start categorizing, let's start understanding it. But in any given year, if the business does poorly or does better, do we attribute that to a failed incentive, or do we attribute their lack of business to having done better at conservation? So it's this inaccurate, well, what's the horse, what's the cart, what's the push, what's the pull, what's causing what? That's why, by definition, we don't have CII in the objective, because it's disparate, it's heterogeneous, and it's very difficult to start drawing conclusions about what efficacy of what measure in any given year to a particular business performs to. Yeah, thank you though.
It's 12:09. I'm not sure if we can, I mean, many of you know how to reach us, so I would encourage you to send any additional questions that you have to us. If it will help inform the comments that you all provide, we're happy to talk. But we hope that this has been useful to you all. And we really thank you for all your time and your continued engagement with this reg. We appreciate the community that has been helping to ensure that it's the best that it can be. So we'll look forward to receiving your comment letters and have a great start to your week. Thanks a bunch.